And really what it came down to was, okay, you can discern in your head and in prayer all you want, but ultimately, no matter what happens, God is going to bring good out of it. If we're cooperative with God's grace, I mean, he can only bring good out of it. You have to discern on your knees, but you can't just discern on your knees. But I was looking for something really authentic. So then I took that first come and see visit, and I loved it. I fell completely in love with the community, and it was like just a light bulb went off in my head and in my heart, and I knew it was that clear.
You didn't feel like you were giving up anything.
No, I felt
Is it
like I
like
was
that?
gaining everything. I felt like I was gaining everything, trying to figure out, okay, Lord, how do I continue this relationship with you in this radically different environment? I felt like at times that I was hanging on by a fingernail, that God was holding my hand by a fingernail. There were points when I really felt that way, but I knew that I was never going to let go. I knew that He would never let go of me.
All right, welcome, Parker. Thank you so much for accepting. I'm so
Yeah,
excited to talk to
yeah, thank
you.
you.
For everybody, Parker actually contacted me through YouTube, and because he wants to evangelize, just like me. And so today we're going to talk about his journey discerning married life versus religious life. And first of all, so Parker, welcome. And
Thank you.
have you always been Catholic? First of all.
Yes, yeah. So I grew up as a cradle
Mm-hmm.
Catholic, and we were basically a family, that went to church on Sundays, prayed at meals, pretty normal Catholic family, nothing out of the ordinary. So that was kind of where it started. Uh, was my parents really did an amazing job of raising us with well-formed consciences, and I think that allowed on that human level, it allowed for a lot of the graces that were to be given in my life to kind of prosper once I was ready to receive them. So, yeah, yeah.
And did you ever have a falling out at some point, like most people?
I, to be honest, I didn't. Um, I mean, I've definitely had points where it's waned,
Mm.
right? But I never had a point where there was an actual break, I think, in my relationship with God, and that's been a real grace in my life um, that I need to be more thankful for.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I like most kids, unless they have really really exceptional parents. I'm thinking of like Saint Therese, for example. Most kids, don't really care that much about their faith until they're a little older, maybe preteen or teenager, and that's kind of what happened to me. You don't really think about these things until really you gain the use of reason in a real way, and kind of once I started to get to that point of just human development, right? Um, I think the Lord started to work in my life in a way that I could perceive. Not that He hadn't been before, of course, but just in a way that I was more self-aware of, and that was mainly through the action of other people, as happens with most of us, right? I got involved in a youth group at my church, which for all the good things about it and all the things that could have been better about it, it was exactly what I needed at that point in time, and it really led me into deeper relationship with God and into my Catholic faith, and it was a perfect combination of um, fostering really a spiritual life within me at that young age because of the focus on Eucharistic adoration and the Mass that we had in that youth group, and then also on the intellectual life. We had a number of people that were volunteers there who really would foster the desire in us to ask deep questions, and that really lit a fire in me, at least on the intellectual side, right, for what the Catholic faith is. So I think that's kind of how the groundwork that God did in my life at the beginning of my kind of conversion. And I guess I don't really know where you want to go from there. I can
No,
keep
it's
telling the
great.
story.
No, I like no,
So
it's great. I think it is something that is so important that we don't get to have, at least in our generation, most of us, that we don't have this sense of, at least in the on the education side, we're never actually asked deep questions. We're only meant to regurgitate whatever our teacher believes. And I think that that could help so many young people ask more deeper questions about God and actually have this desire for God if we only had this intellectual discussion about him, which is, so I think it's so very interesting that it helped you, keep that faith, because I think that's why a lot of people fall out of the faith, is because for example, for me, that was never a thing that was discussed when I was a teenager. These questions weren't really welcomed. Yeah, it's interesting what you said about that. So
and
what,
and
yes.
sorry, so my wife and I are actually, we're the youth ministers at our parish, and we also do religious education for fourth and fifth graders, or I think
Nice.
it's third through fifth graders. And because of that fostering that I personally had, and my wife had too. My wife was a part of the same youth group. Um, that fostering that we both had of being able to ask those deep questions, it has now um, really blossomed into how we teach kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
How we teach kids the faith. And so in our our third through fifth grade class, we had one of my priest friends the other day. He like dropped in to our class. He's not even a pastor, a parochial vicar at our parish, but our pastor was sick, and he was helping out with the mass. And he was after the first mass in the morning, he was just kind of walking around like, what do I do? Where do I go? And he stumbled upon our class. And I don't say this to like um, to brag or anything like that, but just to show like what kids are capable of
Yeah.
learning. And these are third through fifth graders, and we were talking about the uh, exactly what it means for Christ to die for you, and why he had to die for you, which gets into some really hard um, philosophical concepts
Yeah.
that a lot of people never think of, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you go to a normal uh, usually your regular Catholic church or even Protestant churches, what they end up teaching you is, well, Jesus died for you.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because he loves you,
Yeah.
and but it's like, well, that doesn't
It
really
doesn't
answer the
answer
question, does
anything.
it? It
Yeah.
doesn't answer anything. And
No.
so we were getting into it, how like, okay, Adam and Eve, they caused this sin against God, and that sin, it's like trying to create a break in eternity, right? And we're like trying to
Mm-hmm.
explain this to the kids, and they're getting it, and
Yeah.
and when you create a break in eternity, um, you know, um, only something with eternal power could heal that break, right? But also humanity, man, is the only one that could fix it, right? Because he's the one that caused the damage. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, it's necessary for something that is both God and man to take upon the action of redeeming us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the simplistic version of it. But these kids, they get that,
Yeah.
and and my priest friend who had walked into the class was like, "Holy cow!" Um, he was telling these kids like, you guys are learning college level stuff that most people don't learn until they're in college,
Mm-hmm.
possibly even graduate school in theology. And and that just made the kids, like, it made their day,
Mm.
because they're
I'm so
realizing
proud.
that, yeah, they're so proud of themselves. They're realizing that, like, wow, um like I'm not just this kid that needs to like absorb in the information I'm told. I can
Yeah.
actually think about deep things. And again, these are third through fifth graders.
I think it
um
it doesn't help that today we just dumb everything down for
Yeah.
children, and they're so much smarter than
Yes.
we make them out to be, than we expect. And they always surprise you. And I think a lot of it is due to that. We just don't give them the chance to develop their minds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And you know, that was a huge thing for me, was, and I was in high school. I was probably a sophomore in high school when this really started to stick. Um, at least the intellectual side of the faith really
Mm-hmm.
started to become uh, a draw for me, right? But the fact that these individuals were open to me asking those questions, and then also were willing to walk with me through them, right,
Mm-hmm.
to the answers, um, was really really huge for me, because like you said, um, we can have a spiritual experience of God, and that begins the relationship, right? And that happens to a lot of people. um, they'll have in some way, you know, God will reach out, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's uh, you know, through a moment in prayer, or whether it's through another person, whatever it may be. But then if that is not nurtured, right, and oftentimes the way that that needs to be nurtured for the person is, you know, it's either through an intellectual route, or it's through, you know, the relational route. You know,
Mm-hmm.
ideally it's going to be both
Yeah.
eventually, right?
I
But
think I
I
think we
think most,
definitely eventually need both, but yeah.
yes, and but people are, I think, disposed towards one or the other in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, right?
Definitely.
And so if that's not fostered, then the grape's going to wither on the vine, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's put in rocky soil, right?
Yeah.
So the seed is put in rocky soil. So for me, it really was like the aligning of the stars. You know, God really aligned everything
Mm-hmm.
in my life so that uh, I could take the next steps with Him. And for me, that over the course of my sophomore year of high school, you know, I started to get more and more intellectually involved in my faith. I was doing tons of research on CatholicAnswers.com,
Mm-hmm.
if you know of them, right? And just like asking every sort of apologetical question. So I was very disposed towards that intellectual route, and still am. Um, but but as I started to get deeper and deeper into my faith, the associate pastor at our parish started to become the vocations director for our diocese, and which was great. You know, I knew him really well, and so that was a perfect, you know, another moment when God was really intervening in my life, placing people in my life at the perfect time, and with the perfect amount of accessibility for me to take kind of the next steps in my journey. And what that those next steps were discerning a vocation to either the priesthood or the religious life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh, can
so,
you expand on
yeah,
that?
so
Yeah.
yes, and
What was there a moment in time, for example, uh, that made that desire even deeper? Because I guess for it's well, I don't know. See, that's the thing. That's why this is so interesting to me, because I didn't grow up Catholic, and so I never had. Well, I grew up Mormon, and so it was more the men and some women that would go on a mission. That was our calling as a young person when we turn 19. Well, when boys turn 19, to go on a mission. And so, how was it for you? Was there a point in time where you thought, yeah, this is definitely how? Yeah, what was the experience for you?
I'm going to be honest, I don't remember an exact point in time
Mm.
when, like, maybe it hit me. I might have to do some memory searching there to see if maybe there was, um, but I really do think it was kind of just a gradual thing over the course of
Mm-hmm.
particularly my sophomore year of high school and my junior year of high school. And it was by fostering this relationship with my parochial vicar at my parish, who was also the vocations director. and that really kind of started me off on my vocational journey. Really opened my eyes towards realizing that that was something people could do,
Mm-hmm.
because like you said, most people just aren't aware
Mm-hmm.
of those options of the priesthood being for them, or of the religious life. Even more so, even I would say even less people are aware of the religious life, right? So while building that relationship with my vocations director, he was kind of helping me do some initial discernment of things. And really what it came down to was, okay, you can discern in your head and in prayer all you want, but ultimately what you need to do is you need to go out and you need to visit places.
Mm-hmm.
You need to visit the seminary that our diocese sends guys to. If you're interested in the religious life, you need to go and visit religious communities, right? And so that's what I did. I think it was my junior year of high school. Took I took one visit to our diocesan seminary, undergraduate seminary at the time, for like a weekend or something like that, with I believe it was like four other guys that were my age. And this was another thing that was really beautiful, was my class, my high school class. Um, we had, I think I want to say we had five guys out of my high school class, at least at my youth group, who went on to discern either the priesthood or the religious life.
Wow.
Which was like, I believe, out of those of us who were really really involved, right? That was probably around half of us
It's
um,
amazing.
ended up discerning the religious life or priesthood. Now, how many of us persevered in the end? I think it was actually only I think it was only one,
Mm.
and he's getting ordained a deacon this year for my diocese.
Oh,
Um,
wonderful.
so but what that does, some people might see that and they might say, oh well, only one out of five persevered. That seems like a failure, doesn't it? But what, but what
I
people don't
don't think so.
understand, no, it is not a failure.
No, I
What
feel.
people what people don't understand oftentimes is that journey of taking the time to discern the religious life or the priesthood,
Mm,
going to seminary for 4 years or 6 or 8, however long it is, um, or joining the religious life for a long period of time. What it does is it gives you that deep formation in your faith, that therefore, if you end up discerning out, right, you are very well disposed now towards towards evangelization, towards fostering your relationship with Christ, towards having, if you end up discerning the way to marriage, towards having, I would say, a marriage that is growing on good soil, right?
mm-hmm,
Because you yourself were able to be cultivated upon good soil. And
mm,
so, I always tell young guys that are um, trying to figure out what they want to do vocationally, is like, just take a year, discern either the priesthood or the religious life, because only good things can happen from that.
mm,
And as you'll see, like, I I definitely had a messy journey in the religious life. There was a lot of things that went on that
mm,
probably were not super ideal, but really, no matter what happens, in my view, no matter what happens, God is going to bring good out of it, right?
mm,
And He's going to bring immense good out of
yeah.
it, for your life, because as we know, as Catholics, all of our sufferings are used unto good. They're able to be united to the cross, and so, um, even if your vocational journey ends up being a complete dumpster fire, by
Standards,
some
yeah.
people's
Yeah.
estimation, right? They're on the outside looking in, and they see like, oh well, that just seems like it was a complete failure, complete
Mm-hmm.
dumpster fire. It was actually like a purgatory, right? Like, it was a purifying fire through which we were able
Mm-hmm.
to pass. And if we're cooperative with God's grace, and I'm not saying I was every moment of the way,
Mm,
um, but if we're cooperative with God's grace, I mean, he can only bring good out of it. So, that's why I tell guys, like, you can't do wrong by going and discerning the religious life or the priesthood, and young women, of course. You cannot go wrong discerning it. Now, um, what's interesting is I had the opportunity to be involved with communities and with a diocese that at the time was allowing people to enter that vocational journey right out of high school. Like I always tell young people who are discerning, um, trying to figure out their vocations, to just jump in. The religious communities and the diocese that my diocese at the time would allow people to discern, to begin actively discerning when they were, as soon as they graduated high school. Okay, so when they were 18. And um, to my knowledge, now in a lot of places that's not really an option,
Mm.
or that's not as much of an option. Most religious communities will require you to have like either a bachelor's degree, or they'll just require you to be 22 or 25, whatever it is. And I think that I understand why a lot of them are doing that,
Mm-hmm.
because there definitely is a crisis of immaturity in
Yeah.
um, in our present day, right? But I don't know if I personally agree with that kind of line of reasoning,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that oftentimes actively discerning in that way, either entering a minor seminary or like an undergraduate seminary, or or joining the religious life, as soon as one graduates high school, it allows the person to uh, kind of ride the wave
Mm-hmm.
of that vocational journey that they're on, because I think God, a lot of times, he uses that passion in a young person, in a teenager. He uses that passion and that excitement for
Mm-hmm.
good. Now, of course, if the church has established these laws in certain areas, then God's going to work with that, right? But
I feel like, sorry to interject, I feel like
yeah,
sometimes that's exactly what that young person needs
yes,
to grow up.
yes,
Um,
exactly, and
yeah.
that's exactly what I needed. Um,
Mm.
when I entered the religious life, um, I was incredibly naive, um, and as most kids are, but
Yeah.
I think I was probably more naive because I grew up in a really good family. I went to a really good school,
Mm-hmm.
like a really like one of the best public schools in my area. I went to, and 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 I was very disposed towards uh, the church and towards
Mm-hmm.
relationship with God and towards the intellectual side of things. And so I did kind of live under a rock in a few ways, especially as regards uh, individuals um, taking advantage of their authority
Mm-hmm.
over me. Like I remember being told as soon as I entered the religious life, like, hey, um, like we got to work on we got to work on this for you, because you need to learn how to basically defend yourself against um, somebody who may not have your best interest in mind, right? and
Mm-hmm.
and and as we all know, people who are coercive or what have you are in every aspect of human life. You're going to get people like that, and oftentimes people like that are drawn towards or even put into positions of authority because they seem to be more type A personalities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times those people will they'll be really good um, at pushing people towards a goal and driving people um, towards something and getting things done. But oftentimes, the negative side of that kind of a personality is that they can be more of a coercive type of a person, and they can be more heavy-handed and overbearing. right? So that was something that just on a human level, I think I really had to learn when I entered the religious life. I had to learn like how to healthfully interact with people like that and keep my own dignity and not just be a doormat, you know? So
Yeah.
sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I was gonna ask why Franciscan though?
Yes.
Out of
So yeah,
all the
sorry,
orders, you
I'm
know what I
skipping
mean? All of the
I'm
no, no,
skipping a
no, it's
little
okay.
bit
I was
of my journey there.
just like, yep.
Yeah, so I initially, when I was discerning, because my parochial vicar was the vocations director, really the first thing that I was exposed to was the diocesan priesthood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I found out pretty quickly that wasn't for me. Um, I I think at the time, part of the reason was I sought something more authentic,
Mm-hmm.
um, more, or I guess you could say less connected with the uh, secular world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we often call diocesan priests, we call them secular priests, right? Because
Yeah.
they're in the world. And so I think that was kind of one of the things drawing me towards the religious life. Um, and of course, throughout all this, like it was it was God's hand ultimately, right, driving me towards all these things. But I'm experiencing it on the human level. I'm not seeing the full picture here, and I'm you know in a vocational journey, you're kind of going, you're being led both by the desires that are within you, pushing you towards a certain thing,
Mm-hmm.
and you're also then being guided by the boundaries given by the church and by authorities within the church, right? So um, because of that, uh, I knew pretty quickly that I wasn't called to the diocesan priesthood. And so therefore that left the religious life, which
Mm-hmm.
is like, okay, there's like 500 different
There's so
options here. Um,
and sorry, why
and
not what made you believe that you weren't called to become a diocesan priest?
yeah, I think it was just that desire within me for the authenticity that
Oh yeah.
I didn't see in the diocesan priesthood as clearly. Okay,
Mm,
not to say that there is not authenticity there, because there 100% is. It's just it's an authenticity that is very much it's intrinsically connected with the secular world, because it needs to be,
mm-hmm.
because the priest
Yeah.
is in the secular world. Um, and I think God was just leading me towards something a little more radical.
A little
um,
harder.
and as you'll see, he led me to something quite radical.
Yeah.
He really he plopped it in my lap. But as I was discerning religious life, you know, I had I was initially working off of those desires within my heart, right? And um, I was also working off of, you know, people that were kind of in my diocese and things that I knew of, right? Because you can't discern things that you don't know of, right?
Mm,
So, um, and there was a group of priests who were in a missionary order called the Society of the Divine Word, and I took a a come and see visit out at their seminary out in Ohio. My parents came with me at the time. I think I was a junior in high school at that point. It was like a weekend thing. Um, and I knew pretty quickly after that order wasn't for me. Um, so again, that goes to the point of like, if you're discerning a vocation, right, you just need to jump in, and
mm,
you can't discern. Um, you have to discern on your knees, but you can't just discern on your knees.
mm, yeah.
You the necessary element of discernment is actually visiting a seminary or a religious order, whatever it might be. Um, unless you do that, like it, you know, you're not going to know anything. You're just going to be really just playing around in your own head, and it's going to be stuff's going to be ping ponging around in there, and you're just going to get anxious and who knows what. So And I think that really goes with anything. If you're if you're trying to discern what kind of job you want,
Yeah.
or you have to talk with somebody. You have to go and like shadow somebody, or start taking classes in those subjects, right? You can't
Mhm.
just like, you have to start reading books about it,
Yeah.
you can't just like think about it. So anyway, after that visit to their seminary out in Iowa, I pretty well knew that that wasn't for me. And kind of around that same time, I had gone to a diocesan conference. It was like a men's conference in my diocese, and I met these Franciscans there, um, who didn't wear shoes,
Awesome.
who um, who all had beards, and they didn't trim their beards. They just let their beards grow.
Hmm.
They had shaved heads, which I later found out is called the full tonsure. Um, Whereas like a regular tonsure is where they kind of
Yeah.
have the ring, the
Hmm.
halo tonsure. And they wore, like real wool habits, very thick, very itchy. Like it was like something straight out of, it was like exactly what you imagine St. Francis as being,
Hmm.
right? And I met some other Franciscans out there, and they're wearing like these polyester habits, and they're very like flowy and very nice and warm, and um, you know, and they're wearing shoes. They're living in frankly a really nice house a lot of times, and it just struck me as odd. I was like, that
Hmm.
just doesn't, it doesn't seem terribly authentic to me. Now, you know, the church the church imposes her authority on things, and imposes her blessing on things, right? So that's not to say that those orders are bad or anything like that. Of course not. Um, but I was looking for something really authentic. Um, and like I said earlier, it ended up just kind of plopping in my lap. This group of
Mm.
Franciscans was in my own diocese. I'm in the diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend of Indiana, the state of Indiana in the United States. Um, and this group of Franciscans was, their mother house was in downtown Fort Wayne, which is the city I grew up in. I grew up on the northwest side of Fort Wayne, and their mother house was like half an hour away from me. So I met them at this men's conference, and from there, I just fell in love with their
Mm.
charism, and um, with the individual brothers. I began. I remember my first come and see visit with them. I think was probably uh, a couple weeks later after that men's conference. Like I guess I should say, at the men's conference, they invited me in to pray um, the liturgy of the hours with them.
Mm.
They would break, and they would leave the talks at 9 a.m., at noon, at 3 p.m. You know, and they would pray the liturgy of the hours, and they invited me to do that. Um, and I really started forming friendships with a lot of these brothers, and uh, and so then I took that first come and see visit, and I loved it. I fell completely in love with the community. Um, and it was like just a light bulb went off in my head and in my heart, and I knew, um, it was that clear. Now, not everybody gets things that clearly, but I certainly did. And I continued more and more come and see visits, because, like I said, they were 30 minutes from my house. So I don't know. It was probably once every other month I would go. And then once I turned 18, I was allowed to go for like an overnight visit, right? And so I think it was the latter half of my senior year of high school and into the summer after I graduated, I started to do more overnight visits. And then they also had a required, I think it was a 2 week come and see visit that you had to do before you could enter. Okay. And so I did that the summer uh, after my senior year of high school. And, like I said, I knew
Mhm.
it was. it was abundantly clear. And so I entered August 15th of 2014. So I graduated high school in May of 2014, and then I entered the community in August of 2014. And I started my postulancy with them, which was about a 9-month process from August until May. And I had a year-long novitiate. And then I was in temporary vows for 2 years before I discerned out.
Nice. And could you
So,
explain
yeah,
a bit of the day-to-day the rule of life for
yeah,
Franciscan, since you were in there for two years? Is that correct?
4 years.
Four
I was
four
there for
years,
four
sorry. Yeah.
years. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So I left in the June June of 2018. So from
Mm-hmm.
from August of 2014 to June of 2018. So
Mm-hmm.
just a month or two shy of 4 years, basically. So pretty much the rule of life, as I said, there were some really obvious things like they wouldn't wear shoes. Their
Mm-hmm.
habits were really rough and woolly. They grew beards. They had the full tonsure, and they lived lives of complete poverty, no money at all. Everything was either donated or we would go out and beg, right, for our sustenance. Um, our living quarters, our friaries were provided by donors. It was uh, it was beautiful. It really was. It
Mm-hmm.
was it was magnificently. It was a beautiful, beautiful life. Now the day to day was basically we would start our day at midnight because we would pray matins, which is the prayer of the divine office. In the new form, it's called the office of readings, right? And we would pray that at the traditional hour. We would pray all the liturgy of the hours at their traditional hours.
Mm-hmm.
So we started at midnight, and then it'd be about 40 minutes of prayer, and then you'd go back to bed until 6 a.m. or a little before. You'd wake up, and then we would pray Lauds, morning prayer at 6 a.m. After Lauds, we would have um, a holy hour, a Eucharistic holy hour, where we would do Eucharistic adoration for an hour, and then we would have Mass. After Mass, we would do breakfast around 9 a.m. I think it, or sorry. After Mass, we would usually pray the 9 a.m. of the Liturgy of the Hours. Um, I always get confused on the Latin name. I think that's terce. Yeah, I think that's terce, and then noon is sext, and 3 is none. So 9 a.m. we would pray what they now call mid-morning prayer, right? And then we would go to breakfast after that, and then we would usually have between after breakfast until noon. We either do some sort of work around the friary, or we would do an apostolate. A lot of things we would do would be like giving out our excess food to the poor that were around us. We lived basically in one of the poorest areas of Fort Wayne, and we lived a block away from some projects housing that was there. And we would go give away, we would get tons of bread from, I don't know if you know of Panera Bread. They give
Yeah.
out like any of their bread that they can't use during a day, they give away.
Mm-hmm.
So we would get a lot of it, and then we would basically go out and distribute it to the neighborhood.
Nice.
Um, we would also get people who would come to our door. There would be a brother who was called the porter, um, and he would answer the door of the friary, and oftentimes that would be things like ministering to people, receiving donations, and then giving out donations, right?
How was the transition for you from your
Hmm.
life in the world? Was it difficult for you?
For me, it was not at all. It was seamless. It really was. I think I was, like I said, I knew,
Mm-hmm.
and I fell in love with the community, and so it really was seamless for me.
Mm-hmm.
There really wasn't an aspect of it that was even like difficult at the time.
You didn't feel like you were giving up anything.
No, I felt
Is it
like I
like
was
that?
gaining everything. I felt like I was gaining everything. And I think that's not normal for most people when they discern the religious life or the priesthood. I was given a very clear grace. And I think just a lot of things in my upbringing disposed me towards that on a human level too. Um, but then on the level of grace, like the Lord just showered me with graces during that
Mm-hmm.
time of making that transition perfectly seamless. Between our 9 a.m. and noon hours, we would kind of do various things like that. We would also have, during our formation years, particularly in our postulancy, in our novitiate, we would have classes during that time, kind of like interior formation that was provided by the community. We would do a lot of audio classes by like Dr. Brant Petrie. Do you know? Have you
Yeah.
heard of him? Okay, so he does a lot of scriptural teachings, and we got a lot of his work, his lectures in audio form, and so we would have like a little boom box, and we would put the CD in, and we just listen and take notes, and it was, he's amazing. I
Mm-hmm.
really appreciate his work. So we got a ton of scriptural formation, a lot of formation in the spiritual life, particularly in the novitiate. Um, we did, classes on the catechism, classes on the entire Bible. During our novitiate year, we had to read the entire Bible. We had to read 3 chapters a day. Um, and so you finish the entire Bible in that year. During the postulancy, we basically had to read the entire catechism. Um, and then, during our temporary vows, it was a lot. We were getting a lot deeper into the scriptural side of things, and it really was quite a magnificent intellectual formation that we had.
Mm-hmm.
Now, none of it was accredited or anything like that. It was all just private
We don't care about
stuff.
it.
Yeah, which was actually great because
Yeah.
it was a stress-free environment of learning,
Mm-hmm.
and it for me, that really allowed me to absorb a ton of material.
Mm-hmm.
So just on the intellectual side of things, uh, there was an immense amount of graces for me. Also I'm thinking during our first year, our postulancy, we did a lot of our classes were on the Franciscan life in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And so just to help in that discernment, like, hey, you're joining a Franciscan community, you should probably really study up on exactly what that
Franciscan
means. And
life.
so yeah,
Yeah.
and so we had there are these 3 massive volumes of work of all of the early Franciscans and
Mm-hmm.
um, all the biographies of Francis, and he didn't have many writings, but they're all contained in there, and then all of the early Franciscans, all of their writings. And so we had to read all 3 of those volumes during that postulancy year, which was an immense help for discernment. During that 9 a.m. to noon, we would do all those sorts of different things, whether it was
Mm-hmm.
apostolate or whether it was study or whether it was prayer, whatever it might be. Then at noon, we would have our noon prayer, then we would have lunch. And then after lunch until 3, we would generally do some kind of work, one of the same things, work or prayer, apostolate or study. Then we'd have our prayer at 3 p.m. And then at 5 p.m., we would have our second Eucharistic Holy Hour during that day. So we would have 2 holy hours every day.
Nice.
And that doesn't even include all the liturgy of the hours that we did, which would
Mm-hmm.
probably comprise about 3 or 4 hours of like active prayer, right? So you're talking 6 hours of prayer every day in one form or another.
Mm-hmm.
So we were the Franciscan community that I was in. They were a Capuchin reform movement, which, for those who don't know, there are 3 main branches of the Franciscan order. The first is the OFMs, the Order of Friars Minor. The second is the conventuals, and both of those go back. Really, they both trace their patrimony to Francis. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they'll probably dispute with each other about that, but about who's actually older. But they both kind of trace their roots back, and then you have a third kind of version of the Franciscan order, and they're called the Capuchins, who started in 1536 as a reform of those previous 2. And the Capuchins really wanted to get back to the what they saw, right, as the ideal of the Franciscan movement, really taking poverty very seriously, because pretty quickly after Francis's, within 100 years after Francis's death, the Franciscan order in a lot of places, in virtually everywhere, was actually pretty affluent, and they were living in giant monasteries, and so there throughout Franciscan history, there've always been little movements that try to bring back kind of the ideal, the ideal of poverty, right? And so the Capuchins were, I would consider, probably the most successful of that throughout the history of the Franciscan order. They really lived that ideal of poverty. You could probably say up until the early mid 1800s. And then things started to change. And that was initially it was for a lot of political reasons. Like there's a lot of turmoil going on in Europe, obviously during that time, late 1700s, mid 1800s. And there's a lot of persecution, right? And so they were kind of forced into living in larger monasteries. And then that's kind of why you see today the Capuchins in most places live in larger monasteries, and they slowly over that 200 years since basically the French Revolution, they kind of became more and more affluent, you could say. Now all three of those orders, they live the vow of poverty in such a way where the individual does not own anything, right? But the community does. Okay, and that's generally like the monastic kind of a model, is that the community owns things, but the individual does not. Whereas the at least the original mendicant model, which I guess for those who don't know, you have usually monastic orders, and then you have mendicant orders. The monastics are like the Benedictines, the Carthusians, there's a bunch of them. And the mendicants are the ones that they usually live in smaller houses, and they will beg for their living, right? So in the mendicant orders, it's generally the individual, and the order itself doesn't own anything. That was at least the ideal, right? And so there's constantly kind of this tension there throughout history, and because of that tension, reform movements come in. And so this group that I was part of was really trying to reform the Capuchin life, the Capuchin ideal of what the Franciscan movement was and is. And so, that was really what the goal was. That was why we did things like not wear shoes, wore these really woolly habits, and grew our beards out and didn't trim them, and lived the intense poverty that we did, was because that was what the early Capuchins did. And the reason they did it was because that's what they believed Francis did.
And so you go through 2, 3 years, 4 years of being in the Franciscan order. At what point did you feel like God was calling you to discern out of that?
Yeah.
And how did you feel about that?
Yeah.
Because you said you fell in love with the order, and it was a seamless transition, and it was a wonderful, beautiful life.
So with our particular order, it became known after I was there for about 3 years that there was some mismanagement going on with those who were leading the order. The bishop of our diocese removed those in charge, and those of us who were left had to kind of figure out what to do. There was because of that that necessary decapitation, literally, there began to be a lot of internal turmoil within the order itself, within the community, and there kind of arose two different camps. One that wanted to continue on as we had been doing, trying to live that very intense form of poverty and things of that nature. And then the other camp kind of wanted to, for lack of a better term, relax things a little bit. Now, I'm probably biased because I was I was part of the camp that wanted to kind of keep the status quo,
Mm-hmm.
keep living what we saw as the ideal. Now, what happened is actually the camp that kind of wanted to reform what we were doing, to change what we were doing. Basically, everybody that was in that camp kind of left the community, which was like 90% of the community. um,
Mm-hmm.
and it got to a point where there was only 7 of us left. And at that point, that was probably a year. That was about a year after the leader of the community had been asked to leave. I During that time, as you can imagine, it was quite a lot. It was a very emotional time,
Mm-hmm.
because, as I said, I really fell in love with this community, and it was falling apart before my eyes. And that, it brought a lot of suffering. It made me ask a lot of questions about myself, and about um, what uh, what my reasons were for joining initially, and for staying. Like I said, there was only 7 of us left, and even with those 7, there was even still some disagreements,
Mm-hmm.
and it just kind of became clear that it wasn't the Lord's will for me to persevere with the community. And I very much wanted the community itself to continue without me, um, which ultimately didn't end up happening. The community, there was about 5 of them left, in early 2020, when COVID hit,
Mm-hmm.
and during that time they decided just to disband, um, which again was another very emotional time for me, um, because I loved my brothers, the individuals. I loved them deeply, and I still love them deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I also loved the ideal of what the community was, and I wanted to see it flourish, even if I didn't feel that I was supposed to be a part of it. Um, and so seeing it die, at the time was
Mm-hmm.
very hard to watch. And during the meantime, those 2 years, I just turned out in 2018. The community disbanded in early 2020. I had met my now wife, and because my impetus for leaving the community during that time in 2018 was that I think there was just so much internal turmoil going on. It made sense that I needed to take a leave, and I knew that I wasn't called just to like do nothing or not discern
Mm-hmm.
anything vocationally, right? And I knew by that point that really, um, that no other charism was for me,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I knew that I wasn't called to the priesthood by that point. Even if I would have stayed with the Franciscans, I knew I wasn't called to the priesthood. That was very clear to me. And so what was the option left was marriage. Um, and I knew that, to properly discern, I didn't think it was necessary, nor did I think it was even smart to try to take a year of just not discerning anything. So I
Mm-hmm.
I, I really just jumped in to
Mm-hmm.
discerning marriage, and trying to, um, find a spouse, somebody that would be a good spouse. Um, that sounds kind of very analytical, and not like, but I think at the time when I was in that moment of turmoil, that was kind of what was going on in my head. Our bishop at the time, we were a small community. We were technically called a private association of the faithful. Yeah, a private association of the faithful, which is really has no real canonical status in the church. This is kind of how religious communities grow up and blossom. The fullest blossom of religious community is called a community of pontifical right, where the Pope has approved the community's rule, um, and their constitutions. So we were at a very low level part, and so all of our vows were really just private vows to our bishop, and
Mm-hmm.
so he could very easily dispense of those vows, which is what happened. Not 90% of the community left in 2018 ish. The bishop just dispensed of all their vows, even those who had like taken perpetual vows, like they weren't perpetual vows in the eyes of the church, right? Because only I think it is canonically only a pontifical uh, a community of pontifical right can take perpetual vows. I believe that's correct. So it was very easy for the bishop to dispense those who were even in perpetual vows as opposed to temporary
Mm-hmm.
vows. Now I was still in temporary vows, so that's very easy to
Mm-hmm.
dispense from anyway. Um, and so um, it became clear, working with my bishop, that he confirmed my decision, and so that ultimately gave me the freedom to discern marriage. I knew that was the path I was supposed to take. And all my brothers were incredibly supportive. Those that were left at that time were incredibly supportive of me. So I left and I started discerning marriage. I met my wife. Um, Actually,
Yeah,
only
how
a
was
couple.
that leaving your way of life as a Franciscan and then coming back into the world? Was it like a shock, almost like a culture
Um,
shock? But then again, you did have contact with the outside world, helping the homeless,
yeah,
giving bread.
yeah,
So I guess it's not
yeah.
exactly the same as if you were like a Carthusian leaving.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It, it,
But
it, I
I'm
can
sure.
imagine leaving a Carthusian monastery would be quite a bit more of a shock. um, but yeah, it was different than how I entered, right? How I entered was utterly seamless.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Leaving, I wouldn't say was utterly seamless, but it was very peaceful. And it
Mm-hmm.
was it was seamless to a certain extent. It kind of felt like just starting back up again.
Mm-hmm.
It felt very natural, I guess you could say. And I think that was a grace. I think that was a grace because I know many people, obviously, who have left the religious life either in my own community or in other communities. And they don't always fare as well with the transition.
Mm-hmm.
I, I I don't know what it is. I have a very phlegmatic temperament, and so I naturally roll with the punches that life
Mm-hmm.
gives me. So that definitely helps a lot. Um, but I think also there were most definitely some graces there, that the Lord gave to make the transition pretty natural.
Is there
So
anything that you immediately missed about the
oh
Franciscan
yeah,
rule?
oh yeah, the prayer first and foremost. It was that was the hardest thing to adjust to, was just on a human level. In the religious life, your prayer is all laid out for you. You just got to
Yeah.
be there. When you leave, you have to be the one to drive yourself to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, and during that time, I never had a moment where I wasn't, um, where I had a break with God. Right? I never had a moment where I had a break with God, but there were definitely, like, I didn't pray every day. I'll tell you that I didn't pray every day. Um, I didn't. It really wasn't until, honestly, it wasn't until I got married that I started to kind of get on my own 2 feet again, and like
Mm-hmm.
get the structure that I needed to be able
Mm-hmm.
to pray daily. It wasn't until then that I was able to really concretize that down again. Um, because it was a hard, that was the hardest part of the transition for me, was trying to figure out, okay, Lord, how do I continue this relationship with you in this radically different environment? On the human level, like I said, the transition was pretty natural, but on a spiritual level, it was it was quite difficult, and it took me, like I said, it took me 2 years until I got married to really be able to kind of get back to a point of some sort of routine. Um, Now, during that time, I was trying to go to school, get a college degree, right? So that I could provide for my family in a way that I saw fit. I was discerning marriage. I was dating my wife at the time. I was trying to, I think taking college classes was really that was really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Made the transition pretty difficult spiritually, right? Because
Mm,
that was like all the pressure and the anxiety of that. I was in an engineering school, and so
mm,
it was pretty academically rigorous, and it was really hard to get back to the routine of prayer. Now again, like I said, it wasn't like I didn't have that relationship with God, but it wasn't a routine everyday thing, you know.
mm. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
I
that, sorry, I think that people have a misconception that once you do, you feel like, okay, I got this prayer life. It's never going to change. But no, it's not like that at
yes,
all. It
no,
comes
it
and
isn't.
goes just because we're so, sometimes we're just so stubborn and we're human. And yeah,
Exactly.
you had this amazing 6 hours a day prayer life, and yet coming out of that, you still had to struggle. So I think that is a thank you for sharing that, because I think people believe that once you become Catholic and once you have everything, going for you at this one point in time, that it's always going to be like that. And it's
Right.
just not how it
Right.
is.
No,
Yeah.
it's usually a very bumpy but hopefully uphill ride, right?
Yes,
So
definitely.
um it's as long as we're and again, like I think the grace that I had was not to break my relationship with God or
Hmm.
abandon him during that time of transition, right? Amidst all the stress and everything, like I felt like at times that I was hanging on by a fingernail, that God was holding my hand by a fingernail. That was there were points when I really felt that way, but I knew that I was never going to let go. I knew that He would never let go of me. Now that I'm in a position to where things can be much more routine, that's really the blessing of being in a vocation,
Hmm.
um, is that it fosters routine,
Mm,
just on the human level, and that's really necessary for cultivating a spiritual life, I think. So that routine, um, since being married, has been very, very good for me, um, and really, I think, allowed me the structure that I needed, um, to start feeling like I could jump back into, um, or not back in, but to doing something like my podcast,
hmm.
where I can be an impetus for evangelization to whatever degree that
Hmm.
actually is occurring. You know, even if it's one person, that's all
Mm,
that matters,
yeah.
right? So, um, like I was talking with my our basically our DRE at our parish, and it was about our youth group. And she was saying we were discussing about maybe should we move to twice a month instead of once a month, because we're a very small parish. We're currently only doing our youth group once a month, and her response was, well, we don't want to just have one kid show up, um, and I get that,
Mm, hmm.
but at the same time, one kid showed up. Like,
Hmm.
that's a beautiful thing. Now, in our diocese, because of like safe environment policies, I'm not sure
Hmm.
if you guys have those out there in France, but I'm sure everybody has to now,
Hmm.
for protecting minors, right? We
Yeah.
we wouldn't we wouldn't actually be able to have just one kid there, so that
Yeah.
does pose a problem, right? Just practically, even if you reach one person, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
And so since um, getting married, since having that more routine, being able to start this podcast and this journey, um, I've had a lot more time to study my faith, to read more. For me, starting this podcast has really actually been a very beautiful thing. I guess I haven't name dropped it yet for those who are like, what podcast does he do? So I do a podcast called Catholicism in the
Yeah.
Car, where I literally I record on my way to work and on my way back, thoughts that I have about the faith. And I oftentimes I get into some pretty deep topics philosophically and theologically. So not everybody's going to, that may not interest a lot of people. Um, and this podcast is not just for other people, it's also for me recording my own thoughts and being able to keep track of things, and just kind of see my own development, and also for my children, like to
Yeah.
have something out there that, if I die tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
I have a YouTube channel with 164 videos on it, hours and hours of content
He is so
that
prolific,
my
guys.
children are going to be able to look at and see and know their father, at least in that way.
Yeah.
And so like that was kind of another really beautiful thing about doing this. And it's fun. It's really
Yeah.
fun being able to have these conversations with people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and like even in my own diocese, my own local context. So I've been able to really cultivate a lot of really good conversations with people in my own family because of this,
Mm-hmm.
because they know now that that I'm talking about these things, and people in just my own faith community and my own diocese. It's cultivated a lot of discussions, which has just been really, really beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
for me personally, being able to, because I felt like for a while that there weren't a lot of people I could talk to about this stuff. Like my wife and
Mm-hmm.
I would have conversations, deep conversations, and I had
Agree.
a couple other friends that if I could meet with, I could have these conversations with. But they're busy, and you know,
Yeah.
and I'm busy, so
Mm-hmm.
but it's really allowed for, a very beautiful flourishing of these types of conversation. I've been involved recently on Facebook, of all places,
Mm-hmm.
um, with the conversation with Dr. Peter Kwasniewski. Have you heard of him?
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes, yes. He has glasses. I know who he is. I know who he is.
okay, so
Yes.
he's very
He's
much on like
written
the
he's
traditionalist
written a
side
few,
of
yeah,
things.
exactly. He's
Hmm.
written a book on the mass, on the traditional Latin mass, a new one, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, the Once and Future Roman Rite. Yeah,
Yes,
is his
yeah,
book.
yeah.
Yeah.
See.
Um, and I recently, I had a priest friend of mine send me, um, one of his other books called True Obedience, where he argues
Hmm.
for basically for why people can disobey Traditionis Custodes.
Hmm.
And, personally, I find that troubling. And I wanted to get to the bottom of why he thinks that. Um, and so, anyway, I,
Hmm.
I don't want to sidetrack us on that whole issue, but, that's been another way in which I've been able to foster some really beautiful conversations on Facebook, at least with him,
Hmm.
with Dr. K, and also with just a lot of other people from all around the world who
Yeah.
I never would have been able to hear their thoughts on things, and being able to just have these discussions.
Hmm.
I think there's a wrong way of doing all this, where people just focus on like debating and rebuttal
Hmm.
videos back and forth, and
Yeah.
like that's good to a certain extent, maybe, but ultimately I don't think it's helpful, especially for inter-Catholic
Yeah.
discussions on things that we disagree about, right? Like we're supposed to be able to exude to non-Catholics that, like, even though we disagree on things, we're able to be civil about it, and we're able to, like, um, have good conversations with each other, and constructive conversations, right?
Hmm.
So, whether the Lord leads me down that kind of path in the future of cultivating these sorts of inter-Catholic, discussions that I think are very necessary to have, that's so be it. If he leads me
Hmm.
down that path, if he leads me down the path of, I don't know, he might lead me down a ton of different paths. We'll see. But, it's just been fun. It's been fun to
Yeah.
have, like you said, to have these conversations, to have an outlet, to
Mm-hmm.
where those of us who are nerdy enough to even care about this stuff, right? The
Yeah.
like 0.001% of the world. Um, like,
Yeah.
but it's a beautiful thing. Like I can have conversations with you in
Yeah.
France and
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm in the middle of North America. So like it's
Yeah.
it's pretty awesome. Yeah, it really
Yeah.
is.
The relationships definitely, and the fact that you find out that there are other people in the world that are interested in what you're interested in. And yeah, like
Right.
just like you, my husband and I have these conversations, deep long conversations about philosophical ideas, theology, and things like that. And yeah, and like you said, I get it. Everybody has their lives and they're busy, but it's nice to have a community that, from all over the world that I get to
Right.
share the faith with. And that is so important. Like just that one person who appreciates that. And yeah, so
Yeah, exactly. It's been like I had somebody comment on one of my videos. Like I don't get a lot of comments at this point. The channel's still really in the baby stages, but
mhm,
he said to me, he was a Protestant, and he said to me, like, for some reason, the way that I'm conveying this information um, is like he's never heard a Catholic who's able to convey it to him in this way.
mhm,
And that's exactly the beauty that we're talking about here is like,
mhm.
you know, tons of people know way more than I do
Oh yeah, me too.
on all of this stuff. Like I'm I'm a Luddite compared to Michael Lofton or
Mm,
Dr. Kwasniewski.
Kuznetsky.
I don't know anything.
Yeah,
Um, but what I can do is foster good conversations
yeah.
um, and 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 ask questions.
Mm,
I'm really good, I think, at the Socratic method.
mhm,
Um, and and some people are really attuned to that or really
mhm,
receptive to that. And so, again, if it's just that one person, that one
mhm.
commenter on YouTube, my job is done.
Yeah.
Like,
I think I've told you this last time. It really is the messenger versus the message. No, you
yes,
and I might say exactly the same thing, but just the way we say it touches someone's
right,
heart, opens their heart to actually listening to the message. And yeah,
right.
definitely.
Yeah,
I'm actually
exactly.
reading
Exactly.
Mere Christianity right now. And as I go through it, it just reminds me of Orthodoxy by Chesterton, but a different flavor. You know what I mean? They go through the same thing, and the same
Interesting.
thing with Belloc. It's the same thing that they're saying. It's
Yeah,
all, and it makes sense. They were all kind of colleagues and friends, but the
right.
message, the way they, evoke that
Yeah,
message is different and will touch
exactly.
people in different ways. So if you
Exactly.
could
Yeah.
give one advice to someone discerning marriage, because you said,
Mm.
you know, becoming and going into the priesthood or religious life, you just got to go in it. Uh, what about marriage? A different advice. I know you just went into that's also what
Right.
you did. You just went right in there. What's
Yep.
another thing that you could give for someone discerning marriage after leaving religious life? Because I think it's a little different, when you've lived religious life versus
That's a
discerning
really
marriage immediately.
that's that's a really good question. So you're saying specifically someone who's left the
Yeah,
religious life and is now discerning marriage, what
yeah.
kind of advice I would have? Wow. Nobody's ever asked me that before. I've never asked myself that before. I think that I would say if you've been in the religious life for any amount of time, um, you're obviously serious about your life with God, right? And as much as you can, just lean on Him and don't let go, right?
Mm,
Like I said, even if you're holding on by a fingernail, right? Don't let go.
mm,
Um, no matter what happens, no matter what sins you struggle with, no matter um, what life events come your way, um, hold on and be open. Don't close your heart. Because I know with marriage, marriage is is different in the way that you would discern, because you're seeking someone who oftentimes is a diamond in the rough.
Mhm.
Actually, probably always is a diamond in the rough, right? And because there are a lot of, in our secular culture, right, it's hard to find somebody who is, especially if you're coming out of the religious life, who is going to be able to is going to be taking their faith maybe as seriously as you.
Mhm.
um, and I think it takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of trust. And maybe that's not the best advice. I don't know, it's not terribly practical advice, because again, like, I had my wife and I, we knew each other from the time that we were kids.
Mhm.
Um, she was best friends with, or not best friends, but they were my sister, my younger sister, and her were friends. And so, we just kind of immediately reconnected, um, through that, um, as soon as I got out, basically. And like I said, I knew that I wasn't supposed to be in this limbo area of discernment. And so I just said, hey, would you consider dating me? I know I've only been outside the religious life for a month, but, and some people might look at that as weird, like, oh, geez, he left the religious life just to pursue a girl, you know? Um,
Mhm.
and hey, that's a horrible assumption for somebody to make.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you do not know what somebody is going through, and
Mhm.
what their reasonings are.
Yeah.
And B, I think it's actually, it can be a very good sign that the person knows that they're not just supposed to be in this limbo of discernment.
Mhm.
Now, if you had if you were in the religious life and you had contact with this person,
Mhm. That's a different
while you were in the
story.
religious life and then you left, yeah, that's a different story, definitely. Um, that probably wasn't a very good discernment
Mhm.
there. But our community was pretty strict, um, in regulating, who we would have contact with, just for that very sake, right? And so, I saw her maybe 3 times for like 5 minutes at a a mass at our cathedral, right? Throughout the 4 years that I was in the religious life, right? So, um, she wrote me a letter while I was in the religious life, and I didn't write her back, which she still gives me headache about, right? But
And so she should.
yes, yes, she should, yeah. But in my case, that was not the case.
Mhm.
And so, I left. I knew I was supposed to discern marriage, and I just jumped into it. And again, I think if you're in that similar situation, then yeah, you should just try to jump into it. If you find somebody that you you think would be a good companion and they take their faith seriously, um, go for it. And like, I think some people will try to look for the absolute perfect spouse, right?
Mm.
People do this in the religious life too. That you got 500 different communities that you can choose from. You're trying to find the absolute perfect one. Just choose one, and then and that's what discerning in the religious life is for. That's what dating is for.
Mm.
You got to choose somebody, and then you got to actively discern with them whether they want to pursue marriage or not. That's why we
Mhm.
date. We don't just date to date. You
Yeah.
date to pursue marriage. So yeah, I don't know, that
Awesome. No, that's great. That's great.
would be my advice.
Um, well, thank you so much. This has been a
Yeah,
wonderful discussion. We got
yeah,
into a
definitely.
lot of
Thank you.
different things, and
Right.
thank you so much for sharing that story because it's, like I said, it's super interesting to have someone talk about going into religious life and then leaving because usually
Mhm.
it's only just a one way they end up going there. So yeah,
Right.
thank you so
Right.
much, Parker. This is not the last time
Yeah.
you guys are
Oh.
going to see Parker.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll
Hopefully,
be
and
talking
and
again.
and I'd love to interview you sometime. So that
Yeah,
would be really great.
yeah. So where can we find you first of all?
So my website, www.catholicisminthecar.com, you can basically find every single link to anything I'm involved in. there. But then I also have a YouTube channel, Catholicism in the Car. Please feel free to subscribe. That helps me a
Yes.
lot get this content out to others, as you, Alexis, know very well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also on virtually any podcast platform you can think of.
Mm-hmm.
My work started off as just a podcast, and I would also upload them to YouTube. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to do more videos, and so I'm starting to try to do some writing too.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see how that works.
Yeah.
I work a full-time job.
Yeah.
I have a family, so my time is limited,
Yeah.
as is yours.
Yeah.
So we can only do so much, but
Yeah.
do what we can, right?
Yes. 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 I'll put that in the description for this video.
Thank you.
And you have a Patreon page too. So if you guys want to help
I
him
do.
out, he
Yeah.
has a
Yeah.
Patreon page. Like, he is very prolific. Like he said, he has about 164 videos. All he needs is just like the extra quality for the sound and
Yeah.
whatever else he needs. If you want to help him out with that, he does have a Patreon page. So
Yeah. Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. And I also have like a GoFundMe page too. If
Yeah.
people don't want to do like the monthly thing,
Yeah.
right? You can
Yeah.
just do like a one-time donation, things
Yes.
like that. Or like if you don't know how to donate to me, you can find my email and we can try
Yeah.
to work something out if you really
Right.
want to try. But yeah. So
Right.
awesome.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Parker, for this.
Yep.